Given that neck deep is an expression, does knee deep mean it's not that bad? Given that neck deep is an expression, does knee deep mean it's not that bad? Or rather, do they both have negative connotations that the former just takes to the extreme? I realize both expressions are not used together. It's always bothered me intellectually, but instinctively, I assume they both imply bad situations. Is this correct? I've also encountered ankle deep.
I will offer a contrarian perspective here, and propose that neck deep functions differently from knee deep often enough to warrant a clear distinction, although this by no means lets knee deep off the hook as being necessarily not that bad. See penultimate paragraph and corresponding example for caveat. I notice in newspapers around the period from 1910 to 1920 that the phrase, neck deep, is used often in a literal sense to refer to people that are, for all intents and purposes, completely submerged and only floating in the natural position for a human being in water, which is exactly neck deep. When figuratively extended, this is almost never used to describe a good thing. Germany is neck deep in Russia fighting, writes the Chicago Tribune, paywall, in 1918. It seems to me that the figurative expression, like the literal one, might carry more of a connotation of being stuck in something to the extent that your feet are not on the ground, as in the case of Germany warring with Russia, whereas knee deep actually draws attention to the legs and their movement. Knee deep, then, is well suited to describe a situation in which one is beleaguered by obstacles and proceeds, whereas neck deep might suggest that the situation is too dire to proceed. Consider some case studies. Kimberly Howard was knee-deep in planning her wedding when she and her then-fiancé heard some friends talking about a service they used to plan their own honeymoon style blueprint. One would be less likely to say that they were neck-deep in wedding planning, since the activity is generally a positive and optimistic one, and doesn't imply a complete incapacitation of the person undergoing the planning. In an article dated today in People magazine, actor and comedian Patton Oswalt relays a story about the death of his wife. I was still neck deep in grief and suddenly a single father and not sleeping, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to live and go on with life if this was left undone. He told Myers of finishing I'll Be Gone in the Dark. I basically begged the co-authors and the publishers to find a way, and they were the ones to find a way and finish it. Here again, neck deep seems fitting in describing a kind of grief so crippling that it forms the basis of an existential struggle. One would not be likely to say, knee deep in grief, perhaps because the implication would be likely to strike a listener or reader as not quite bad enough. My conclusion is that no, the mere existence of neck deep as an expression doesn't have any relative implication on uses of knee deep, but because each expression corresponds to a quite different literal situation, the figurative extensions have somewhat unique connotations, and it could be said that there are some cases where knee deep and neck deep could both be used, and some cases where one would be an unlikely fit compared to the other.
Google Books searches turn up matches for ankle deep in trouble, knee deep in trouble, thigh deep in trouble, ass deep in trouble, waist deep in trouble, chest deep in trouble, shoulder deep in trouble, neck deep in trouble, and eyeball deep in trouble. Understood literally, these would seem to be distinct gradations of trouble, corresponding to, say, water levels. But being used figuratively by different writers, such word choices may not indicate the same levels of trouble in different settings where they appear. The exception is when one writer uses multiple figurative expressions of this type. Thus, in a bio blurb for Leonard Peterson and Rolf Kalman, a collection of Canadian plays, 1972, we read this. Upon completing his formal education, he has been banging out plays and stories over many decades now for radio, television, theater, film and print. He is often knee-deep or neck-deep in trouble because he has never properly learned what to write and what not to write. He just writes, in his Indian country way. And from A.T. Nialo, The Lost Children, 2014. What else can you think of that will end up getting me waist-deep in trouble? I don't do anything halfway. She knew his question was rhetorical. I plan to make you at least neck-deep. In both of these instances, it seems quite clear that knee or waist-deep in trouble is not as bad as neck-deep in trouble. But more generally, a writer is under no obligation to calibrate degrees of trouble from toe to hairline nor to convert any such estimates made with reference to a generic human body into truly objective measurements such as inches or centimeters. Knee-deep in trouble may leave room for worse flooding, figuratively speaking, but it is still plenty of trouble.
If someone is in bad trouble, in British English we can say idiomatically that he is up to his neck in it. It could be figurative manure or feces, or a policeman might accuse someone of being up to his neck, i.e. involved in a crime. I have only found the expression neck deep in a small number of places. It is the name of a Welsh rock band, and it is listed as meaning deeply involved in a small number of online slang or urban dictionaries, which have no particular standing as authorities. It may be current, very informal usage in some demographics, e.g. us under 30s. In contrast, knee-deep and ankle-deep are mainly used in a literal sense, when people are immersed up to the named joint in a liquid, usually water. I have heard people who are involved in difficult or frustrating situations say, "I'm knee-deep in shit because of this," but, again, this is deeply informal.
I assume both neck-deep and knee-deep imply bad situations. Is this correct? Yes. Imagine some body part is buried in something remarkable enough to remark upon. Let's see, mud? Muck? It's not good. Given that neck-deep is an expression, does knee-deep mean it's not that bad? Not necessarily. These expressions can't be mapped precisely to any sort of number line or axis. They're colorful expressions. In a given piece of writing, the author is not likely to use more than one. Inherently, they don't provide relative measurements.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.